So, yeah, I have obviously transitioned, a lot here, both in terms of, my church, of course, but I think for me, it was a lot of personal and internal transitions that led to, you know, public
Yeah, more of
transition.
an yeah. So it was like a personal transition for you that led to as the leader leading your church, essentially,
Yeah,
transition.
I think one of the weaknesses of as we have instructed young men, as we have brought them onto our staffs, as we have educated them, um, sent them out, hired them on our teams, we've almost put them in a box and said, okay, you're 21 to 25 years old. You have to believe everything you're always ever going to believe and practice everything you're always going to ever practice. And you have to have all that settled right now before age 25. Now, Luke, I am 46 years old. Okay. What are you? You're in your 30s, I'm
30,
guessing.
33, Jesus age.
You're-
Boom. Amen.
Okay. Look, how much have you grown and how much have you learned? How much information have you processed? How many experiences have you gone through, good or bad? How
Hmm.
many books have you read? How many sermons have you heard? How many lectures have you encountered that shifted your perspective?
Yeah. Well, I can tell you this: 33. Oh, how should I put this? 23-year-old me would not believe where 33-year-old me is. As in, 23-year-old me will look at 33-year-old me and think that man's a heretic. I mean, that's how
Absolutely.
far that transition for me, that shift has only happened in the majority of it in the past 5 years. You know,
Well, here's what I'm trying to say about it. That is whether we're talking about doctrinal things or not, that is inevitable with anybody that grows up. I mean, you get married, you have children, you have life, you have experiences. You read stuff, you hear stuff. It's part of growth. A 1-year old puppy doesn't look like a 7-year old puppy.
hmm
A newly planted tree doesn't look like a 500-year-old sequoia or whatever,
yeah,
It's growth, development. I think we applaud it in a lot of areas. We would expect a 46-year-old to be a more mature husband, father person, but if that person has grown and developed and matured and learned things in practical ministry or even philosophical things, um, we look at that as bad, and we put a 21-year-old in a position. I mean, I think about honestly when I was at West Coast at the beginning, at least. I mean, we used to actually do this. I don't know. I bet you had to do this when you graduated from West Coast. Dr. Rick Hauk stood up and read a statement to you and said, "If you ever deviate from this, we will take your
yeah,
diploma back,"
yeah.
which
You
of course,
forfeit your diploma. Yeah.
of course,
No,
later.
Brian, hold on. Side note on that. Is this true? I have heard that they have actually removed the King James clause from that. West Coast Baptist College has removed that. I've heard they had. I heard that
Well,
there was somebody who shall
I
remain unnamed on staff that said
actually
you have to change that. Is that true?
okay. Well, actually, now I haven't been there in 8 years, but I'm pretty sure they eliminated that whole thing because the fact is you can't do that,
Yeah. Maybe that was
and because West Coast is accredited now,
Mhm.
tracks regional accreditation. I was there when we were going through that process, and that was one of the things that came up in the conversations was about that. I mean, you can't legally take somebody's diploma away that they paid for and earned because they shifted, some kind of. Can you imagine Harvard
Yeah.
doing that,
Yeah.
saying, "Hey, you're." you're now a Christian. Anybody that becomes a Christian after they leave Harvard is, you lose
Well, I
your
was going to
diploma.
say the unaccredited Bible college diploma I have from there really carries a lot of weight. So I'm glad they haven't
Absolutely.
taken it.
Right.
Yeah.
And again, that's a funny there's a whole mountain of stuff to talk about there.
Yeah.
But I do know that I'm just using that as an example of the pressure.
Hmm.
And it was like this, it was put out like this sacred, solemn moment. I just talked to a guy just the other day that went through this exact same thing at ordination, the exact same thing. Um, if you ever use another version besides the King James, you will take your ordination papers away, which again, I understand. Trying to encourage somebody to stay true to the faith. And in that world, that is the faith. But the point I'm making is the pressure that we put on young men creates all this conflict we're seeing today.
Mm.
They struggle because they know what it means, and it completely eliminates creativity and development if you're not willing to let somebody grow and learn in these areas. And then, but what ends up happening, man, is inevitably you can't stop the learning train. I mean, here's a dude standing on the train tracks. A train is running 100 miles an hour going down the tracks. Some dude's learning theology. He's listening to sermons. He's interacting with other pastors. He's waking up to podcasts and biblical truth, studying the
Hmm.
Bible, and that train starts running.
Yeah.
And there's no way you're going to stop it. And I can't tell you how many times I've said this to a guy asking me questions. Well, I can tell you, I'll say, he'll start saying all these things that he's thinking. And I go, well, I'll just go ahead and tell you this. Once the train gets going down the track, you're not going back. You're not going back.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
not going to stop. So here's probably where you're going to end up being. What does that mean for you today? I don't know. But for me, that train started running before I left California.
Hmm.
And I was learning and growing and seeing things, questioning things. And so the transitions for me in really, translations, music, outreach, liturgy, structure, leadership style, all of all the wheels started turning for me between probably 2012 and 2016, heavily
Hmm.
2014 to 16. One of the big crises that happened early on philosophically and leadership wise was when my leader, Pastor Chappell, had that physical breakdown from so many things that happened. And there was a lot going on there at that time. There was, goodness gracious, people were, Kerry Schmidt had cancer. Larry Chappell, his own son,
Yep.
had cancer. I mean,
Yep.
there's so much, and the pressure was so intense that, I mean, it knocked him out, I think for like 10 weeks, maybe in the spring of that year, 2011. And that was the year I preached his youth conference sermon at West Coast, 2011. And things
Yep.
started changing for me. Things started
Mhm.
shifting. I started being involved in more leadership. That all happened that year. I started sitting on the platform.
I remember that.
Remember that? I was just like, all
Yeah.
of a sudden, I was just
Yeah. This is
there.
all during my junior,
Yeah.
senior year.
Then accreditation starts coming. I don't remember what year that was, shortly thereafter. But
Yeah.
all these things are leading me to some of the first transitions were leadership, philosophy, this life management, thinking about how how I should do leadership myself, wanting more of a collaborative team model rather than
Hmm.
a top down model. And admittedly, in my early days at River City, all I knew was top down model. So I didn't do that well. And I probably hurt some people along the way, I'm sure. But now that it's more fully fleshed out in my life, I can see where I started going and where I am now.
Mm.
Then the second one for me was worship and stuff. And honestly, man, I was never a like stuffy high church music guy. That was never me. But I think in our world, you had this thing about CCM, which is almost a funny. I don't know if you've ever noticed this. Have you ever tried to use the phrase CCM like to somebody that's not from our world? They don't
Oh
even
yeah,
they don't even know what you're
yeah.
talking
No, I
about.
mean seriously. Like, we'll go ahead and make this public knowledge on the podcast. I'm recently married,
Yay,
and
let's
I don't
go.
think. Yeah, I don't think we've talked about it.
Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you,
Amazing
thank you.
opportunity and relationship God gave you. That's awesome, man.
Yes, yes, and really, it's a miracle. So I met my wife Ashley online on a dating app, and she had been living 10 years in New York City. She's originally from Ohio, but anyways, had been living in New York City and non-denominational. Some traces of Southern Baptist in her background, but non-denominational. Some of the terminology that I grew up with that I've used, she's what is that? So yeah, I remember the first time I said CCM around her. She goes, "What is that? Is that like a TV channel? Like, what are you talking about?" I said, "Oh, contemporary Christian music." She's like, "Contemporary Christian music? Like, what do you mean?" I was like, "Not hymns." She's like, "Oh, okay, all right,
Yeah.
yeah." So yes, it is one of those. It's beyond Christianese. It's independent Baptist
Oh my word.
insider language, big time.
Absolutely. And so, it was more like at that point, Southern gospel, I would listen to that. That was never an issue. But because contemporary music, what they call contemporary Christian music, mainstream Christian bands, et cetera, was so looked down upon and so spoken against. But I remember starting to think, well, I don't know, man. I don't know how this holds water. I remember having a debate in one of my classes with Mike Herbster. I don't. You were probably gone by then. That was a
Yeah,
fun.
that was after. I would
He,
have loved to seen that.
he's ultra conservative, and maybe we should. I'll try to have Mike come on the podcast at some point
Yeah,
because
yeah.
I'd like him to share his perspective and hear us discuss it a little bit. Obviously we disagree, but he's very right wing when it comes to musical associations, the source of the music, who wrote it, its identification with the world sound,
Mm,
very symphonic orchestra, as far as its um, origins, and I mean it's they put timestamps on how long a song should be out before it's used
yeah,
in the church. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff.
yeah.
So that's my background. That's where I went to Bob Jones University. I was in very conservative independent Baptist churches for all those years. That's what I was, but inside and kind of in my mind, and ultimately, I was like, "There's no way." And then, of course, now as I have thought of more about, then started living it out. I think, I'm preaching tonight. We're recording this on a Wednesday. I'm preaching tonight on David's song in Second Samuel chapter 22, and the whole thing is about he's my rock, my salvation, my deliverer. David believed that. That's why he acted the way he did. He believed God was all these things. Now he's calling on God to help him. So it's not just cerebral. It's not just mental. It's action oriented. Same thing's true about all my positions and all the things that I've
Mm,
done. It starts up here. It starts in here, but it's going to lead. It's going to lead to action. So now, I just went to a Brandon Lake concert a couple months ago. It was amazing. It was an amazing concert. I've been to Winter Jam.
heathen.
Yeah, I know we go to Winter Jam every year. Our church goes. We took like 40 people from our church to Winter Jam.
Mm,
And I mean, these guys are sharing the gospel. I'm looking around. I remember looking around, just tears running down my face at 30,000, people in this center, just mostly young people. We had the Irwins in concert at the last church advance, and they stayed over for Sunday. On that Sunday, one of our men that grew up in a legalistic IFB church, during the worship service with the Irwins, he literally got out of his seat, walked to me during the song, and just basically falls on me, hugs me, just weeping and thanking me for, having the kind of church where he doesn't have to worry about that in his kids
yeah,
and you can grow up in a free environment. And more than all just that feeling stuff is the fact that a lot of these people are really great believers with great testimonies and share the gospel with clarity. And you would think if you didn't come to this that it's all about money and none of them believe the gospel and they're just like they're Satan's instruments to usher in, the one world church. I used to hear that. The
Oh
the
yeah.
the seeker friendly church will be the one world church, and CCM will be the music of the one world church, and
Yeah.
lay down. Well, it's kind of the tool whereby we lay down our arms of fundamentalism and all that, just all this.
Hmm.
But my contention is this on transitioning music. First of all, there's latitude, right? Like
Hmm.
every church is different, every believer is different. You've got to do what you believe in your conscience you're okay to do. So there's latitude there, and so don't do something. I shouldn't do something in my church that I don't think I should, because of my
Yeah.
conscience or whatever. But then at the same time, I think we are severely limiting our reach and our effectiveness by some man-made rule book about what worship should look like in the church. I do
Mm.
not believe at all that there is one singular right or wrong style of music. And I know some people
Mm.
just can't handle that.
Yeah.
And here's what here's I got two things to say about this. I just want to hear what you have to say too. But number one, where is the clear scripture reference that talks about the style of the music, like whether it's hip hop, country style, bluegrass, orchestra? There's just not one.
Yeah.
In fact,
Well, that
yeah.
I've heard one of the arguments is all the instruments that Nebuchadnezzar used to get him to bow to the idol off limits.
Oh my
I don't
word.
even remember which one. I only remember sackbut because that's the King James. I don't even remember a psaltery and the sackbut. That's the
Yeah.
two I remember.
So you know what a
Horns.
sackbut is? Do you know what it is?
No, I don't. What is it? What is
Okay,
the ESV
so
tell
this
us what
this
is?
this is the humor of this kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
in Hebrew, sackbut, it literally means sliding tube. So what is a sackbut? It's a trombone. Now,
Trombone.
what guy do you know that supports ultra conservative Christian music would not be okay with the trombone? It's just
Yeah.
nonsense. It's just
Yeah.
absolute. It's the biggest. It's absolute insanity.
Yeah.
And so so if I had to pin a guy down and say, okay, well, what are the definitive scriptures that show you that you're supposed to only have classical style of worship in your church? There isn't one.
Mm-mm.
Then Chris Anderson, you know Chris, he's done some interviews on here and it's been at every church advance conference. Great guy. He, uh, I think they released a new album. He's a musician too, and he had a very strong uh, conservative music person basically attack him personally and say, I can't believe you're doing this. You're sliding off the rails. And then he said this is a quote: "You're making the case for conservative Christian music more difficult." And this is what Chris said in response. Chris said, "If I'm making your case more difficult, you don't have a case."
Yeah.
That's a
Yeah.
great statement.
Yeah.
So okay, I might have an opinion. It's Romans 14. I might have an opinion on a worship style, sure. But when I start making an issue, dividing point, worship wars, criticizing people, not allowing there to be any latitude whatsoever, I think I'm in the wrong here.
Uh-huh.
And I think that churches, um, they are going to look different. I mean, I've got friends whose churches are far more conservative than me. I've got friends whose churches are far less conservative than me. And sometimes I think that's actually really good. I have no problem with it. I think that was the major shift, was just that. It was less about what am I doing? It's less about what really matters and what really doesn't.
Mm. So A couple of just thoughts slash follow-up questions. So in all seriousness, we talk about what scripture is used. I used the Nebuchadnezzar example, sackbut, as one of the foolish ones. This is one that I know now is if nothing else taken out of context, misinterpreted. But and I can't even. It's a verse in Romans. I can't remember which reference off the top of my head now, but it's essentially the verse that says something to the effect of, "If you're in the flesh, you cannot please God." And so the argument that I was taught was, well, yes, if music makes you in the flesh and that, it's got that rhythm, the 2/4 time instead of the 1/3 time, and syncopation, all these things, or the deep bass and drums, that puts you in the flesh and therefore you cannot please God. I mean, I know my response to that, but I'm curious, like,
Yeah,
for
I mean,
those out there that's the argument, maybe that's what they're
I mean,
struggling with.
here's where it breaks down. There's no theological or logical absolute there, and that's the problem. It's totally a subjective statement.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think I can make a case that there is fleshly lyrics and a fleshly message that would encourage a way of thinking and a way of acting that would be inappropriate to God and therefore should not be consumed because it can do that. I mean, I think that's fair. I think, well, let me just put it right down to it. What business does a Christian have being influenced and entertained by music that promotes sex and drugs and murder, like some mainstream like rap or
Yeah.
suicidal type promotion that's found in certain rock strands or whatever? I would say, why would a Christian fill their flesh with that? But does that, but the problem is, here's the fundamental difference, Luke. The fundamental difference is they would say that flesh is actually in the music, not the lyrics. And that's okay. I'm just telling you what they believe, and I'm just telling you that is a very difficult case to make.
Yeah.
Here's another interesting thought on a positive note. Here's the question: where should we be getting our way of doing worship? The answer is from the Bible, and particularly, how about this? Particularly, isn't there a book in the Bible about worship and about music and about praise? Of course there is, and that's the book of Psalms. What do you see in the book of Psalms? All right, listen. Shouting, drums, dancing,
clapping your hands,
raising your hands.
Yep.
Okay. I see more of that in concerts I've been to. I was at a camp. Our youth group went to a camp here in Florida just a couple weeks ago. Man, I'm telling you, the worship experience was amazing. It was a lot of that going on, where I've been at camps and churches where nobody moves a muscle, nobody says a thing, nobody responds in any way. And is that, they criticize people for it being entertainment, meaning they're performing for other people. But is it really performance entertainment if people are actually participating? Or is it more performance entertainment if people are sitting back in their seats looking like this at the only people up there singing or worshiping? Again, there's subjection on both parts. But what I'm saying is, you can't say that people who sing loud, clap their hands, clash their cymbals, beat their drums, raise their hands, shout, sing, and dance are fleshly. Because if that's true, then the kind of worship that was described in the book of Psalms is fleshly. And I don't think anybody's going to try to go there.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, I had a 4-hour conversation about this with some family members. It's been years ago. And I again, I was in a place in them where I wasn't even as I've read and studied and talked about it a lot since then. I should say I didn't have a lot on me in terms of I didn't have a lot of ammo for my case other than. But yeah, what does the Bible say about it? Where is, like you said, this worship style, acceptable, godly, holy worship style? Where is that defined in Scripture? Where is that list of forbidden instruments,
Hmm.
and so on and so forth? And and then you have the argument. The one that I kept getting was, well, yeah, but we have to think about when a church has a does the contemporary worship, that's mimicking the world. Well, I'm talking to people who go to a church that, they have a choir and they have a full orchestra, and that and that particular church does traditional worship very well in that way. And I said, well, look, like the orchestra part, that's the same type of music they use as background music in wicked Hollywood movies,
Hmm.
So if we want to follow that logic of, well, this is what the world uses, well, yeah, the world uses everything. We as far as these
Yeah.
styles and methods,
Does
like
that
we all,
mean does that
yeah,
mean the instrument or the tool is inherently evil? I mean, it's a classic
yeah,
illustration. I mean, this in that case, this is wrong
yeah.
because people have taken this and written and drew
Hmm.
things that are inappropriate. It's not the
Yeah.
tool. I just think it's a mistake. And if you really want to, back to my analogy, I think that's a strong one that I'd love to hear somebody kind of rebuttal or speak back to. How do you deal with these clear, celebratory,
Hmm.
worshipful experiences in the Bible that seem to have everything we say you're not supposed to have? I was at a camp one time, and you know, uh, there was a special number, which for some context here, what that means is somebody singing without the audience before a message typically.
Yeah.
So we get done with congregational singing and somebody's going to sing a solo, there's going to be a quartet, there's going to be my favorite at this same camp was a flute ensemble, no joke.
Yeah.
Um, Now that was a blessing. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. That'll
And there
touch
were
your soul right there.
8 girls and 1 guy, and that's just a whole nother, subject, but so at this same camp, the kids after one of those numbers, it was a solo or one of these things, the kids all just started clapping. That's very natural. It's a very natural response, and the leader, I mean, got right to the microphone and said, "Look, we're not here to give applause to men. We don't clap after our songs. We just say amen." And he like coached the kids through saying amen. And they're all, I mean, I was watching these kids just sitting there like, what is he talking
Yeah.
about? Um, I do not believe that's fleshly at all. I
Hmm.
believe that it's the natural human response to something they are excited about, to something they appreciate, um,
Yeah.
and
Well,
it's man-made.
yeah. Well, I was gonna say, when we want to try to put it on the musical elements themselves, whether it be the instruments, the rhythms, the way the song and the harmonies and all that are structured, when we want to try to identify that as flesh, that's incredibly subjective, because it's like you said, when you go back to the idea of lyrics, well, lyrics is objective. If a lyric says something, now yes, there's all these subliminal messages, okay, whatever, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about, if they, like you referred to, the type of music that encourages sexual immorality and violence and so on and so forth, and drug abuse and whatever, that is that's very obvious. Like, those words are explicitly stating that.
Yes.
It's a very objective
Yeah.
claim that can be made, that the
Yeah.
lyrics, whether they're sung or spoken, they're objectively fleshly. But yeah,
Mhm.
when you try to say, oh yeah, well, that certain method style of music is fleshly, that's incredibly subjective. Because yeah, what do you do about Psalms? What do you do about the uh you know cultural music, for example, in Africa, where you see tribes and they're dancing and they're, I mean, what do you do with all that?
Yeah,
Maybe it
here's the thing.
fluctuate culture to culture, but
What most guys are talking about when they're talking about conservative music would have been culturally sinful, if you will, at a certain time in history. In other words, it would have been the music of the world at a certain time in history. So the fundamental problem with these people that believe this is they're stuck in a cultural ideology rather than a biblical construct.
Mm.
You're talking about objective and subjective. One is solid, one is clear, one is no question. And anything like that, we should be ready to stand on. And this is biblical clarity. Okay.
Mhm.
Subjective means, well, another word is latitude. There's whole chapters in the Bible about this. Romans 14, 1 Corinthians 8, 9, and 10. The whole point of it is to learn how to navigate things that are not objective.
Hmm.
Okay, so I think you're making a really important distinction here. Here's an example. So we were the other night. I think my wife. We were on our little family vacation out in Kansas City. I believe my wife was getting ready to put a reel up, discussing our events of the day. It just so happened that night we were the night before, excuse me. So she's doing this the next day. The night before, we had gone to a Kansas City Royals baseball game. The date is July 3rd. And so my wife does really good with social media reels and different things like that. So she likes to look for an appropriate background song for a reel, if it's predominantly video, pictures and stuff. So I said, what about Take Me Out to the Ball Game? And, and I'm not talking about the current Luke Combs one, which is a great song. I'm talking about the old classic, Take Me Out to the Ball, that one. And we were just talking about it. I was like, yeah, I heard that song was written for this. And so she starts in Instagram looking up Take Me Out to the Ball Game. Of course, there's a few various artists that wrote it and produced, performed it. We were looking for just kind of the authentic, original, old school Take Me Out to the Ball Game song that you would sing at the baseball game at the seventh inning. Well, she found this old recording. It was an old, and I think it may have been the one she ended up using in the reel. It was from, I can't remember their names. It's two sisters that sang. They're in a lot of Christmas music. Jingle Bell. I know they got a recording jingle. Anyways, it's this nostalgic sound. It's the Burl Ives, Frank Sinatra. It's this era of time. And she started playing it. I looked at her and said, that sounds like a modern independent Baptist church.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because in their mind, fundamentalism and truth was in this era between 1960s and 1980s. And so everything about the 60s through the 80s or earlier even maybe is what they considered to be objectively the right stuff. So it's the music style, it goes to all the stuff, service times, outreach,
attire,
all of it, It was a way it was done in a certain era. Forget why it was done, forget what it was done before, forget other things that have happened since, and we call that objectively right or wrong. And it's just a bad standard, Luke.
Yeah.
That's the problem. It's like the classic argument for, against modern translations. Well, they took that out. Well, that's because your standard wasn't the original writings. Your standard was another translation. Well, of course it's different.
Yeah.
That's the point. Why would you, if you took away words and changed words and modernized words, it's not the same words. That's kind of the point of a different translation. If you didn't do that, there'd be no other translations. You see what I'm saying? I'm saying the standard cannot be that. Just like music, the standard is not what did Burl Ives sing like on his Christmas album in 1940. The standard is Scripture, and when you're not standing on that, you're going to look real funny, and it's not going to make it in the future very far. It's going to all catch up to people at some point.
Yeah. Well, I don't have the information right in front of me, but I remember hearing something, some story or account sometime told about how, I don't remember what time it would have been, maybe the early 1900s, mid 1900s, I'm not sure, but there was a resistance by churches to introduce the piano into their churches because the piano was commonly used in saloons and bars. And can you imagine that now? I mean, now the piano's the only acceptable instrument allowed in many independent Baptist churches.
You're exactly right.
So it's like you said, but it's embracing that, methods change, the message does not. The message of the gospel of Jesus Christ doesn't change. The message and the object who we're worshiping doesn't change. But yes, the methods certainly can. So with that in mind, Bryan, let's now, for those out there, you already probably know this if you've been listening to Church Advance and Bryan on his podcast for any amount of time. We did a series of episodes, 3 parts, I believe, the infamous transition episodes about transitioning from the King James to modern versions at your church. And so that's something, entire series. You can go back. I believe we released that in early 2023, perhaps it was 2022, maybe. I can't remember exactly, but I do remember it was early 2023 because it was around the time that Church Advance 2023 was happening, and there was a lot of haters that were trying to attack the conference in conjunction with the episodes. So anyways, you can go back and listen to those to talk about if you want to know more about that transition. But yeah, Bryan, with whatever time we have left here, I was wanting to ask you what is kind of your story and how you transition the worship style there at River City.
Yeah, absolutely. It started right away, and I can take you all the way back to the beginning. So when I got here, the worship was exactly everything you can imagine that was independent fundamental Baptist, but worse because it was bad. It was bad. The philosophy was bad. The production was bad. The leader was bad. The visuals, it was all bad. I mean, when I walked in the auditorium for the first time, the projector for the screen was broken and it was dangling. It was just hanging there by cords. Obviously, there were no screens. The song leader was incredibly awkward, best way I can put it, just absolutely. I mean, let me tell you a quick story about that. So I think it was our first July 4th service. I'd been talking to him. He actually had a nice voice, but he was just incredibly awkward with just standing there leading. He would say weird things. He would do weird things. And I was trying to help him. And I had several meetings with him. I said, Steve, look, man, you need to loosen up a little bit. You're making it uncomfortable for you and for others. We need to be more welcoming. It needs to be more natural, this kind of thing. So at that time, this is how so long ago this was, because I would still have done something then that I would never do now. We sang a song one Sunday on 4th of July called The Patriots Honor. Now, you may remember this from back in the West Coast days. It's an old Matt McMorris song. He probably wishes it wouldn't be attached to his name anymore, but it's one of those classic America, Jesus, kind of thing.
Jesus was an American. Yes, amen.
Yeah, it has all the vibes of, and it's about revival. It's about bringing God back.
Yeah.
It's not a terrible thing, but anyways. So it was a well done song when it was done. Well, there's this line that says, "And I'm so thankful for those who stand up for the red, white, and blue." And so I asked Steve if he'd sing the song, and I had already gone through this coaching with him about loosening it up and kind of just belting it out, because he could sing real well. So he gets to that line, and again, he is just stiff as a board, microphone held just perfectly like he was trained at his IFB school. And when he got to that line, "I'm so thankful for those who stand up for the red, white, and blue," he just took his hand and just swung it out and pointed at the flag. It was just this.
Thanks for trying, Steve.
Yeah. So, there was stuff like this going on. So, okay. So in the Q&A time, this is when I went to candidate. This is the Saturday night before the Sunday. In fact, this weekend, we're recording this in July. I don't know when it releases, but I'm in 4 days. I celebrate my 8th year anniversary here. So this was this time 8 years ago. This is all happening. We're in a Q&A Saturday night before the Sunday that they candidated me, July 24th. And which actually it is July 24th today. What I'm telling you happened 8 years ago today, probably about time. So, the church gathered. There's about 30 people that wanted to go through Q&A with me that Saturday night. He was there. And basically one of the questions was essentially, what do you think we need to change right away to become more effective? And I just looked right at Steve and I said, Steve, look, the music, we've got to make some adjustments in the music. It's not good. The very first song we ever sang that day was Come and Dine. Come and dine, the master called it, come and dine. Sunday morning, first song.
Yeah, you've made it clear that's one of your favorites. I remember us talking about this on the podcast before. It's up there
Oh
on
my
your
goodness! So
top
obviously
charts.
never sung that again. So, and it was, and we had a choir, about 10 members, with a little small makeshift orchestra, a woman playing piano who couldn't play flats. It was a mess. And I just said, we've got to do this better. Within the first month, I had started introducing some newer songs, and we're talking about like just stuff that wasn't in the hymn book. I mean, like even simple choruses. I mean, that's how far we were.
Yeah.
So, and then I removed the choir because they were so bad and people didn't want to practice. People were having bad attitudes about it. So I walked in one day and said, we're done with the choir. If we're going to do something, we're going to do it right. And, and I didn't really have a bunch of, I think they were relieved. I think the people were doing it out of habit. I didn't, but then, so it was Aaron Chan coming. Okay. Which happened about 4 weeks later. And he brought the music up a level because of his dynamic piano playing, honestly.
Yeah.
So part of it was just stylistically, some things needed to change. Part of it was having able people to do what we wanted to do. Then it was song selection, slowly and surely. So all that began to happen like right away. And the funny thing was the church had no aversion to Southern gospel concerts. They had Southern gospel people. In fact, that weekend, the weekend they voted for me, they had a Southern gospel trio right there singing. Yeah. So it was like the people, what they did in public was predominantly hymns, but anytime you're in a church that is willing to have a Southern gospel quartet or something sing, there's room there.
Yeah. And I think you're describing 95% of congregations, even at independent Baptist churches.
Absolutely.
I mean, I grew up at independent Baptist church, and just about everybody I knew, we're singing hymns and piano only, like an orchestra maybe in church, but in the car, they're jamming out to Casting Crowns and Hillsong. I mean, that's, so.
I mean, I asked a kid, this was probably 3 years ago, a kid that I knew that was actually going to West Coast Baptist College. And I said to him, I said, man, he was talking about the same stuff. And I said, how many kids there, listen to contemporary Christian K-Love and use modern translations? He just started laughing. He's like, everybody. And the point, it just needed somebody to say, okay, this is okay in church. Yeah, like if we're going to listen to it everywhere but church, what's the big deal? And it's a bad message. But that wasn't my messaging. I didn't really message anything. I never really said anything about it. I just started introducing songs. Obviously, we took the choir away. It wasn't very long before we had a team of people that were singing and playing, kind of like the classic worship team, the front line, which is kind of an old school thing now. But then it was about mostly visuals and style and song selection. Really, honestly, it was song selection for the longest time. We were just implementing new songs. Then when we moved to the new campus, it was a new visual. It was some different people. That's the first time I think we had a bass guitar. We had some skilled people with electric guitars. And honestly, that stuff just kind of came in seamlessly. Like it just wasn't a big deal. We added the drum, the cajon. It was just not an issue. So it was philosophical, but I didn't like teach. I didn't have to. It was kind of already there. It was just they wanted something fresh. It was just more, for me, it was more the practical steps of replacing personnel, adding new personnel, and just introducing new material. And before, I mean, that was, of all the things I dealt with here, of all the transitioning, that was the least problematic of anything that I did. And for a lot of people, I mean, you'd have to be, I would say, in like a real serious, like Bob Jones church
Hmm.
to not be able to have a bass guitar, to not be able
Hmm.
to have some kind of drum, even if it's like with an orchestra, some kind of
Yeah.
percussion. I mean, an acoustic guitar, a guy leading, like who, like in what world is that still like an issue?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so, but there are those people out there, and if you're in that kind of church environment, I mean, look, we're just, that's fine, but that's not where I'm at, and not where the overwhelming majority of people
Yeah.
are.
Yeah.
It's certainly a what do they call that's a subculture of IFB. That's a whole
Yeah.
new thing. That's like
Yeah.
David Cloud stuff.
Yeah.
Uh,
Our boy.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if you're in a culture where that's the majority of what people listen to, anyways, you might have one or two haters, so to speak. I know my friend Thomas Shepard had some challenges as he was implementing particularly new songs. But
Mhm.
again, they were Bob Jones people. That's
Yeah.
where their background was from.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, no matter what you're doing in leadership, you've got to be willing to have thick skin
Hmm.
and endure those kinds of questions and challenges. But ultimately, you have to do, just like anything else, you got to do
Yeah.
what the Lord wants you to do. But I think it was easy to implement newer song selection and
Yeah.
instrumentation, replacing people that were worn out, things that weren't going to work
Yeah.
anymore. So, I mean, we've only been what we are now, like what you see at River City now. Definitely since we've been on this campus. So the first 2 years, there wasn't much of that just because it just wasn't possible. But in
Hmm.
the last 6 years, that's been more pronounced and
Yeah.
clear.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And I think if nothing else, kind of like you said, like you said, the instruments issue can be something that, if nothing else, is going to be jarring to certain people.
yeah,
And Brian, I think you've already alluded to this. Like, you're going to lose somebody. Somebody's going to leave. I mean,
absolutely.
unless you're in a just microscopic congregation. I mean, if you have a
Yeah.
congregation of more than 50 people, statistically, somebody's going to leave.
Well,
Um,
statistically, Luke, some 10% of your church is leaving every year, no matter what. For one
yeah,
reason, they're going
exactly.
to die, they're going to move, somebody's going to get upset.
Yeah,
And when somebody's disgruntled, or maybe even it's just personal issues, they're looking for any shift, even if it's simple, is just an easy off ramp.
yeah, yeah,
Um, so I just think this is a leadership principle. If you are trying to please everybody, you're going to lose everybody.
yeah. Well, that's the thing is, you kind of implied earlier with that stat. Statistically, you can't keep anybody. You can't keep everybody. It's just
No,
not going to happen.
no,
And like I said, people are going to leave on good terms and bad terms. There's no way to prevent them from leaving, though. And
right.
so, like I was saying, the instrument thing could be a little jarring, but kind of like you were saying, if nothing else, you can at least start to maybe introduce new songs. I heard of that's the beauty if you have projection.
Mhm.
You could just project the lyrics, even if you're using hymn books and the song's not in the hymn book. I like what I can't remember who this was, but one pastor, in order to start introducing songs, he kind of would he figured out a way and to kind of I call it clever or just it's really quite brilliant. He was able to kind of introduce a song based on, to some degree, what he was preaching over the next few weeks. So he'd kind of say, hey, we're going to be in a new series about whatever, or in this book, and this song right here really kind of helps us to focus in on the theme of these sermons. And it was a newer song, and
Mhm.
they would just sing that every week. And then he'd do it again, then the next, they'd sing that every week for a month. And then, in a month or two, he'd introduce another one,
Mhm.
just to get people used to sing. If nothing else, it's getting them used to singing songs that are, not, the same, 50 in your arsenal hymn
Oh,
book.
yeah, so if you have a hymn book of 400 songs, the church may only use 30 or 40 of them. I mean, it's
Oh no,
crazy.
it's true. Yeah.
So
I
I
mean,
would say But think about this, Luke. Think that the fact is that we're even talking about this, that there's even a world in which this has to be tiptoed through so much. And there's wisdom and patience, there's wisdom in being cautious, proceeding wisely. But isn't it sad that this is even a thing? Like that the most subtle shift from only piano or taking an organ away or having a guy stand up instead of waving his arms, he's playing an acoustic guitar and leading with his energy. That would actually be an issue. I just,
Yeah.
I know it's got to grieve the Holy Spirit. It
Yeah.
cannot be right.
Yeah.
And so I think that's terrible, but it is something that guys have to navigate through. And
Mhm.
I've even seen guys to excuse their screen use, they will actually put the sheet music up on the screens
And
because
then
it somehow appeases. It's just the hymn book. It's just up on the screen. Because it's almost like they feel like it's their job as church to teach people like music. And I gotta tell you,
mhm.
I don't think there's anything that could be further from our objective as the church than to
Yeah.
teach people how to read music. Um, we, I think there's a great case to be made to not use hymn books for a lot of reasons. One of which is your ability to not look down, but to look up and sing
Yeah.
out. It fills the, but that's all subjective too. But the point is, yeah, I've got subjectivity on my side, and so do you. But let's not try to make it objective. What is
Yeah.
the deal? Why are you trying to take such a hardcore stand on
Yeah.
this?
Well,
And churches are ruined by this stuff.
mhm. Well,
Worship
it's like
leaders have slain its tens of thousands.
yeah, it's true, and it's like we've said about many times and many topics that we've talked about as far as really coming down to methodology
Yep.
is if you're a traditional church and you have a stance on more traditional music, more hymn-based, congregational singing, whatever it may be, that's fine. But can we admit that it's simply a preference and
Yes.
not a theological matter?
It
You
would
know,
help. It would help your relationship with other churches, number one. It would ultimately help your people.
yeah.
Example why this hurts people. Okay, so you've got this really strict, stringent IFB music thing going on. But what if this family has to move? And what if
Mm,
there's not another church that dots their I's and crosses their T's just exactly the way you have with music? What you've essentially taught them is that this is a mark of discipleship.
yeah.
This is a mark of health, and we all know it's not.
Mhm.
So then all of a sudden, these people are lost and floundering in an ever dying culture. IFB,
Yeah.
they're going to be lost without
Mhm.
reprogramming.
Mhm.
And fortunately, people can be reprogrammed, and I
Yeah.
love to see it when it happens. But the damage we do to people by binding their consciences to extra biblical stuff, particularly music may be the worst of all of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad.
It's definitely probably the most obvious, it's the
Yeah,
one that's most in your face, I know the King James issue is something, but I mean, it's definitely something as well, but the music is something that it is what your service, what begins your service essentially and kind of sets the tone. And yeah, it's a huge thing that people notice.
yeah,
And you talk about helping your people. Another way, Brian, I see that it helps people is they understand when you acknowledge that it's based on preference and tradition and not some type of theological biblical stance. I actually think that if you're going to have a church like that, then that's the only way to retain certain people, many people, is because they may come and they may say, well, the music isn't what I prefer, but I understand that they just do this out of tradition and they have a reason. Their reason is just preferential. Every church has their preference, and they're a little bit more gracious to you because you're more or less gracious to them in your explanation of it.
right,
I've got a good friend right now who he's in the process. He's about my age. He's in the process to take over a very traditional church, and this is the shift he's making. I've noticed in his terminology when he's talking to people that are interested in the church or ask questions. They say, "Hey, I notice other churches do it this way. Why do?" He says, "Hey, look." in this case, this is an older church. We have a rich heritage, and we just honored the heritage and tradition. It's not because we think it's theologically, biblically the way we have to do it. It's just something that we've done out of tradition. And every church has traditions. These are ours, and
That's
we're
smart.
honoring our
That's
particular
super smart.
preferences
And
in that way.
I so respect that. The
Yeah.
fact is, people can criticize me all they want to for my church. My church had a heritage, but it was long obliterated. Man, this church was about to die.
Yeah.
The guys that attacked me and said that I had stolen a church, they didn't know what they're talking about, man. This church had been stolen by the devil long before I ever came.
Well, yeah. By the way, that's like saying that Paul Chappell stole his church. Okay, so Paul Chappell had a very similar situation. He arrived to, what was it called, Antelope Valley Community Church or something.
Yeah.
And it was a dead church that he just replanted and relaunched. So for all you independent Baptist haters out there, I'd like to say that Bryan,
He took over.
He just took a page out of Paul Chappell's book.
That's right. He took a dead church and took it over and completely redid it.
Yeah.
Absolutely 100%.
It's like planting a church, but you already have a building and a little bit of people to start with.
That is a really good way to look at that. And it's a story of so many guys. So, I think as far as worship goes, first of all, you need to get some really solid footing on what you actually believe. When I hear somebody say, I think drums are wrong in church, it just makes me cringe a little bit, like, okay, you don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
You're just, that is a parroted, something you heard somebody else say, no forethought, definitely no biblical thought, because drums are all over the Bible. It's just a sad thing when you see people doing it like this. I think if we would just be willing to start it all over, like, I'll be honest with you, Chris Tomlin has a great book called Holy Roar, based on his song Holy Roar, which is about worship. And it talks about the 7 different elements of worship, things like hand raise and bowing down, all these things. It's so biblical, so thorough. And we need it. We need that kind of reasonable way to look at things. Now, some other guys might be listening, having these conversations about, let's say they're the youth pastor or the associate pastor, or they're just in a church that is not their preference. Maybe it's more dated than they would like. I would say this: number one, you don't always have to have your preferences. It may be that church is the very best thing for you and your family for all kinds of reasons. It could be programmatic, it could be philosophical, it could be teaching wise. A lot of reasons why a church with conservative music might be the best thing for you. Like, for instance, if I lived in Fredericksburg, Virginia, I'm going to Kurt Skelly's church for sure. The music is far more conservative than our music is, but the teaching and the program, especially the teaching, but also the program and what they've got going on, will be a much easy sell for me. I wouldn't even care. I'd just be like, well, I mean, it's just different. Get back in my car and listen to my Spotify playlist on my way home from church. This is not a big deal. So to just be so up in arms about this, there may be another better reason for you to just be faithful and be okay with the difference. On the other hand, if there is, well, I will say it like this: there's certainly not a case, again, if you're in this conservative church, musically conservative church, there's never a case to be disruptive and divisive about the situation. And that would be that'd be a wrong position to have. And I don't think in and of itself, it would be a reason to, of course, be disruptive or divisive ever, but it certainly wouldn't even probably be a good reason just to leave, just over music. I think that's a really bad position to have on it. However, if you're on staff and you feel like, okay, let's say youth pastor, let's use youth pastor example, and you just cannot have liberty to teach and model and give an example to the teenagers about what's healthy and what's right and what's good, and you just can't support in that public way, then that's obviously, you probably are looking for a different role, a different job at some point. By the way, that would be true of anything. I mean, none of these things that we've talked about here should be do or die for churches. Nothing I've ever said. I'm trying to get people to do what I'm doing. I'm just trying to bring some sensibility to the conversation and some common sense reality. And so if you can't have any of that, if it's just the stubborn thing that you just can't tolerate and it's not going to be healthy for you long term, that's obviously when you probably should be, looking to do something different. But it has probably a little to do with music. It
Mhm.
probably has to do with
Yeah.
everything else. So I think that's the word I would give to guys that are not leading the organization.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and with leadership in mind, if people do leave, get up in arms over a change in music,
Yep.
then that goes back to this could be a whole other conversation. But it goes to a cultural problem in your church in that you have kind of programmed people or your church has programmed people to think that the church is about serving their and meeting their needs and not about them meeting the needs of others. And that's a whole other, conversation that could be had.
Great point.
Yeah. Well, Brian, we've got a great conversation here about worship and the transition you've made there. There's a lot of other stuff in this kind of in this vein that we could talk about in terms of making these necessary changes at your church. But I think this is a great kind of place to stop for now, and I'm sure we'll come back to this topic at some point in the future.
Yeah, we'll get some guests on here, but
Yeah.
that we can discuss from the other vantage point. I think it's healthy. That's great, Luke. We'll see you guys next time. God bless you guys. Have a great day.